There are some moments in life that change everything quietly, completely, and without warning. They don't come with fanfare, just a sound, a shift, or a feeling you can't explain. For me, it started with a backpack. Not a grand adventure pack or something out of a movie. Just a regular scuffed-up school bag leaning against the wall in our Arizona home. And inside, something breathing, something bleeding, something wild. I wish I could tell you I understood what it meant right away. That I knew what kind of creature was curled in the fabric or why it had chosen us. But the truth is, all I knew in that moment was that life had just whispered a story into our hallway, and it would not be ignored. This isn't just a video about a rescue. It's about a wildcat baby who stumbled into a family and changed the rhythm of their lives. About the fragile thread between fear and trust. About how love doesn't always come with a wagging tail or a purr, but sometimes with a flick of an ear or the silent stare of a wounded animal who somehow still believes in you. If you've ever loved a rescue animal, if you've ever whispered to a sleeping pet, or if you've ever wondered what it means to truly care for something untamed, then this story is for you. Because what happened after that backpack was unzipped, well, you might not be ready for it. Let's begin. It was one of those in-between days. Arizona's skies halfway between blue and stormy, the kind that makes the pine trees outside our windows look darker than usual. I remember because I had just mopped the kitchen floor, and my son Eli had forgotten to take off his sneakers. There were muddy prints in a trail from the back door to the hallway, typical Tuesday chaos. I was too tired to scold. I just followed the trail, grumbling under my breath, until I saw it, his school backpack slumped sideways against the baseboard, half-zipped, faintly twitching. At first, I thought it was the wind. Maybe the back door hadn't fully closed. But there was no breeze in that hallway. No movement except the smallest quiver of fabric. And then I noticed the smear, thin, almost dry, rusty in color, running along the seam of the zipper, like something had dragged across it. Struggling. I didn't move right away. There's something ancient in us. I think something quiet that speaks up when the world goes just slightly wrong. My grandmother used to call it the hush. I stood in that hush, staring at a backpack that should have only held pencils and old homework, and felt every part of me focus. Eli. I called gently but firm. He was in the next room, humming off key while trying to peel the lid off a cup of applesauce. "Did something spill in your bag?" "No," he answered, voice trailing. Then a pause. Wait. Why I didn't answer. I crouched down and leaned in. There was no smell of food or ink, just damp canvas and something faintly metallic. I reached for the zipper, my fingers trembling before I even realized they were. And when I pulled it back the rest of the way, what I saw wasn't something I had words for. Not at first. Curled tightly into itself, wedged between a crushed folder and a lunch container, was a kitten. Or at least that's what my brain decided to call it in the absence of something more accurate. Fur small injured. It didn't yowl. It didn't try to bolt. It just stared. Its eyes were too wide for its face, yellow-green and unblinking, and one of its back legs twisted in a way that made my stomach twist with it. Eli stepped beside me and froze. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I promise I didn't know. I left my backpack under the bench during recess. Maybe it crawled in." He crouched down slowly, his voice small. "Why would it do that?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The creature inside the backpack trembled once violently, then went still again. A small breath escaped its nose, barely a sound, but somehow louder than everything else. I reached in gently, and when I touched its fur, it was soaked. Not just water, not just dirt. Blood. Matted in tiny patches. I tried to lift it, but it let out a hiss that turned into something more broken, something like a sob in animal form. We wrapped it in an old dish towel and placed it inside a shoebox. Eli held the box the whole drive to the nearest vet clinic, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Is it going to live? Can we keep it? Is it scared? Yes. Maybe. Absolutely. The vet was a woman named Dr. Rivera. She had gray streaks in her hair and hands that looked like they'd done this 100 times. And still, when she opened the towel and saw what we'd brought in, her face changed, softened. She didn't say, "Oh, a cat." She said, "Oh, this one's wild." Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. This wasn't a house kitten. This was a wild cat baby, a bobcat. Born in the forests near the northern rim, likely separated from its mother, injured either by a predator or human debris. She showed us the ears' tufts. The tail, short-banded, the paws too large for its size. "It's a baby bobcat," she confirmed, then glanced at me. "And it's barely holding on." Eli looked down at the bundle and whispered, "We should name him." I don't think I started, but Dr. Rivera gave a small, knowing smile. She'd probably seen this play out before. The part where naming something makes you love it harder, makes you fight for it longer. Eli thought for a second. "Coda," he said. "Like friend, that's what it means." Coda, the wounded bobcat, found inside a muddy school backpack under an Arizona pine sky. In hindsight, it doesn't make sense. Or maybe it makes perfect sense. The wilderness doesn't always stay outside the fences. Sometimes it crawls right into your home, bleeding and afraid, asking nothing but a place to rest. And sometimes that's the only invitation we need. We've always been taught to fear wild things, to keep them separate. But the moment Eli laid his hand gently on Coda's trembling side, I felt something shift. Not just in the animal, but in my son. In me. That's the thing about rescue stories. We think we're the ones doing the saving. There's a small lesson there, though. It took me time to see it. Sometimes when something wild finds its way to your door, it's not just looking for safety. It's bringing with it a chance to remember who you are when you're most alive, when you're most needed, when your hands are shaking and your heart is wide open. Later that night, when Eli was finally asleep, I sat in the kitchen with the towel Coda had bled into. I should have thrown it out, but I folded it instead. Something in me needed to keep it, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that the world still sends us little messengers, and they don't always arrive with warnings. Sometimes they arrive zipped inside the ordinary. A backpack, a breath, a stare you can't forget. Coda would stay at the clinic overnight. Dr. Rivera said the next 48 hours were critical. The wounds were deep but not fatal if infection didn't set in. The leg might require surgery. The creature itself, she didn't say. Wild animals don't follow predictable patterns, she warned. They survive on instinct, not promises. Still, I promised anyway, silently, to a sleeping wild cat. In a vet's recovery room. I promised we'd show up. That was the beginning. And what came after the learning, the laughter, the heartbreak, the way this wild little life turned our days into something softer and deeper is the story I want to share with you now. But first, you need to know what Coda really is. Because the next day we stopped calling him Kitten, and we started understanding who he truly was. By the time we came back to the clinic the next morning, Eli had drawn 4 pictures of Coda. In each one, the little cat had a cape, a crown, or both. "He's a rescue hero," Eli said proudly, holding them up like a portfolio. "He just doesn't know it yet." Dr. Rivera greeted us with the kind of face that makes you hold your breath. Not good news, not bad. Just quiet. She led us to the glass panel that looked into the treatment room. Coda was lying in a heated enclosure, his eyes half closed, breathing steady. One leg was splintered, wrapped in purple tape. The rest of him looked almost peaceful. Eli exhaled softly. "He's gonna make it." The vet nodded. "He's a tough one." Then she motioned for us to follow her into the small exam room. She sat down across from us, opened a folder, and began to speak in a tone meant to balance fact and compassion. "Coda's not a house cat," she said gently. "He's a juvenile bobcat, likely around 10 to 12 weeks old, give or take." Eli blinked. "You mean, like the wild kind?" "Yes," she said. "Bobcats are native to Arizona, especially this part of the state. They live mostly in the pine forests, desert edges, places just like the ones around your neighborhood. It's not common to see one this close to town, but it happens, especially when they're injured or separated from their mother. I stared at the folder. There were photos, close-up shots of Coda's ears, his short tail, the banded markings on his legs. "How sure are you?" 85% yesterday, she said. 100% today." Eli leaned forward. "Does that mean he's dangerous, Doctor?" Rivera smiled gently. "Right now, no. He's scared, hurt, and about the size of a grapefruit. But eventually he'll grow. Bobcats don't usually attack people, but they're wild animals. They're not meant to be pets." We sat in silence for a moment, letting that sink in. And I'll admit, part of me felt something close to fear, but not of Coda. Fear of what this meant, of where this story was going. Because when we'd found him, he was broken. Vulnerable. Small enough to cradle in a towel. But now, with just a few pieces of information, he was something different. Not just a rescue animal, not just a cute addition to our home. He was wild. We think we know what wild means. Untamed, dangerous, something to be avoided. But when you look into the eyes of a baby bobcat who's curled up inside your son's old shoebox and hasn't once tried to bite something, shifts. Wild doesn't mean violent. It means unknown. It means instinct. It means free. Later that afternoon, I did some reading. I searched wild bobcat baby and fell down a quiet rabbit hole of wildlife rescue videos, biology articles, and recovery stories. I learned that bobcats are solitary creatures. They hunt mostly at dawn and dusk. Their kittens stay with the mother for up to a year, learning how to move through the landscape without being seen. Most never make it past 6 months. And if they're separated early before they've learned to survive, chances are slim. Eli sat beside me as I read his head on my shoulder. "So, what happens now?" "Well," I said slowly, "he might go to a wildlife rehab center. They can teach him how to hunt again, how to live in the wild. But we'll need to talk with the vet. It's complicated." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Can we still visit him?" "I hope so." That night, he drew another picture. Coda standing on a hill beneath a full moon with a caption written in crayon. "Still my friend. Even if he leaves." The next day, Dr. Rivera explained the options. Coda's injuries were healing. His leg would take time, but he was young enough to recover well. The issue wasn't his body, it was his behavior. If he starts acting like a bobcat again, hissing, hiding, stalking, then we'll know his instincts are strong. And that's what we want. It means he has a shot at going back into the wild. Eli nodded like he understood. But later in the car, he said, "What if he doesn't want to be wild anymore?" I didn't have an answer. And the truth is, sometimes we project our hopes onto animals as if love alone could replace generations of instinct. But Coda wasn't here to be owned. He was here to heal. And maybe, just maybe, to show us something about what healing really looks like. Over the next few weeks, we visited often. Coda didn't hiss. He didn't growl. He didn't act like he wanted to escape. Instead, he watched Eli with a kind of calm intensity. Like he was listening, he began to eat more, gained weight, started limping around his enclosure with his tail twitching ears alert. Once, when Eli read to him from a book about jungle cats, Coda pressed his nose against the glass and blinked slowly. "He likes it when I read," Eli whispered. There was something else I noticed too. Something subtle. Other animals in the clinic barked or meowed or cried. Coda didn't. He stayed still, often perched in a corner observing. When another kitten was brought into the room, a domestic stray, Coda didn't react, just watched. And when Eli spoke, he always turned his head toward the sound. There's a term in wildlife rehabilitation called imprinting. It's when an animal bonds too deeply with humans, making it difficult, sometimes impossible, for them to survive in the wild. But what we saw with Coda didn't quite match that. He wasn't overly affectionate. He wasn't playful or attention-seeking. He was simply present. like he understood our rhythm. Still, Dr. Rivera warned us, don't mistake gentleness for tameness. Wild doesn't mean loud. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most unpredictable. That stayed with me, because it's not just animals we misunderstand that way. People too. We often assume loudness equals wildness, and we overlook the quiet strength, the steady resilience, the wildness that moves like a whisper. There's a small lesson in that. Not everything wild roars. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it heals in silence. Sometimes it watches from the edge of the room, waiting for you to notice. And Coda, whatever he was, whatever he would become, had been watching since the moment we unzipped that backpack. By the end of the second week, Dr. Rivera suggested a trial. Coda was stable enough to be fostered under close supervision with veterinary oversight. Not a permanent adoption, not a domestication attempt, but a chance to offer him peace, safety, and space. We said yes. We set up a quiet room at home. No loud music, no sudden movement. Eli laid out blankets, built a small pillow cave, placed his drawings on the wall. And when Coda arrived, still limping, still silent, he stepped out of the carrier and walked straight to the blanket. No hesitation. He curled into the fabric and blinked at Eli. No hiss, no fear, just a slow, deliberate breath. That was the first night he purred. It wasn't the soft rumble of a house cat. It was rougher, scratchier, like gravel rolling over itself, but it was real, and Eli heard it. He smiled without saying a word. Coda was still wild, still a bobcat, still a creature of instinct and survival. But he had made a choice, a small one, to rest. And that choice mattered more than we could have guessed. The vet room wasn't much to look at. Linoleum floors, a narrow counter, 2 folding chairs, and the quiet hum of machines. But for those few weeks, it became a space where the wild and the fragile coexisted. Not just for Coda, but for us, Dr. Rivera had set up a temporary treatment enclosure near the back corner of the clinic. It wasn't a cage exactly, more like a compact glass-walled recovery space with heat panels on one side and a soft fleece lining the bottom. We've used it for foxes, owls, even a fawn, once, she said as she showed us around. But never a bobcat this young. Coda had been there for 2 days after surgery. His back leg had needed careful reconstruction with metal pins holding the bone in place. The team had worked for nearly 4 hours to save it. We debated amputation, Dr. Rivera admitted, but something in him, he didn't want to give up the leg. He fought harder under sedation than we expected. Eli and I stood outside the glass as Coda slept, his chest rising slow, one paw twitching every few breaths. A soft IV line fed into his front leg. Above the enclosure, a handwritten sign read, Coda, foster candidate, minimal stress only. He's healing, Dr. Rivera said gently. But this is where it starts to get complicated. She pulled out a clipboard. Coda's vitals are good. He's eating more, grooming himself. But we're watching for 3 things: behavioral, regression, stress response, and instinct expression. I must have looked confused because she smiled kindly and explained further. A house cat in recovery might seek comfort, rub against you, purr when you pet them. A bobcat, even a baby one, is different. If he gets too comfortable, we have a different problem imprinting. But if he pushes too far away, he risks isolation. What we need is balance. Eli pressed his hand to the glass. He hasn't hissed once. That's rare, she nodded. Most wild animal rescues don't make it past the first week. If the injuries don't claim them, stress often does. Bobcats in particular are known for shutting down when overwhelmed. It's not aggression, it's self-protection. Fight or freeze. And if they freeze too long, their systems follow. But Coda had done neither. He didn't act to tame, Dr. Rivera said quietly. He acted aware. That week we were allowed to sit in the corner of the treatment room for short periods. Just sit. No touching, no talking, just presence. Eli brought his drawings, pictures of Coda with a little superhero mask, or riding on a skateboard, or curled in a crown made of leaves. He set them near the glass and whispered stories. And slowly Coda started responding, not with cuddles or purrs, but with choice. He would shift closer. He would blink slowly at Eli's voice. He would rest near the drawings. One time Eli dropped a pencil and the sound startled him, but instead of bolting, Coda tilted his head, studying us. "I think he knows who we are," Eli whispered. I wasn't sure, but something about his stillness felt intentional. On the 5th day after surgery, the vet techs attempted to feed him without sedation. Wild rescues are often tube-fed or sedated to reduce stress. But Coda had started refusing his food, and they wanted to see what he'd do when given the option. He was weak, still limping, but when they placed a shallow dish of wet food inside the enclosure and backed away, he crawled toward it. Not quickly, his leg wobbled under him, but he made it. And then for the first time, he hissed. Not at us, not at the techs, at the food. "It's a good sign," Dr. Rivera smiled, watching the monitor. "That's him setting boundaries. It means he's still got some wild left." Eli didn't quite understand. "But why hiss at the food?" "He's confused," I explained. "And he's protecting himself." Sometimes, when we don't understand what's happening, our first instinct is to push back. Coda sniffed the food once more, then began to eat, slowly, methodically. That night I thought about how strange it is what we label as progress. In any other setting, a hiss might be seen as a step backward. But in this room, it was a signal of life, of survival, of identity. There's a small lesson in that, I think. Healing doesn't always look like calm. Sometimes it looks like fighting, like saying no, like hissing at the very thing meant to help you because you've forgotten how to receive help without pain. A few days later, we sat in the room again. Eli brought a shoebox turned into a fort. He placed it outside the enclosure, filled with tiny pine cones and folded paper leaves. "In case he misses the forest," he said. Coda didn't react. Until the next morning, when the techs found him curled up near the wall, nose pressed to the glass directly in line with the shoebox fort. "That's not coincidence," one of them said quietly. As Coda began to move more, we had to start thinking ahead. Dr. Rivera scheduled a consult with a wildlife rehab facility just in case he needed transfer. But she wasn't rushing it. "He's imprinting differently," she said. "Not overly dependent, not fearful, just responsive, and that's rare. Most animals either attach too quickly or reject everything. Coda was choosing moments, tiny ones, to engage, like he understood something unspoken." Eli began writing a little journal. Coda's wins, he called it. Day 6, ate on his own. Day 7, blinked when I said his name. Day 8, didn't flinch when the door opened. Day 9, dragged a crumpled paper ball across the enclosure with his teeth. Day 10, purrs when the light hits his back. Each line was short, unassuming, but together they told a quiet story of progress. We often expect healing to come with noise, with celebration, but in that vet room we learned a different rhythm. One of stillness, of tiny sounds, of watching more than speaking. There was a moment, a brief one, when Dr. Rivera placed her hand just behind Coda as she checked the IV line. He didn't pull away. He didn't freeze. He leaned back, slightly. "You've got a fighter," she said to Eli. He smiled. "He's teaching me how." It was true. Eli had always been quiet, gentle, but now he was showing up with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. Sitting still for long periods, observing, reflecting, asking thoughtful questions. Something about watching this wild animal come back to life inch by inch was reshaping the way he moved through the world. And maybe that's the other lesson in all this. We often think we're helping them, but they're changing us too. By the end of the week 2, Coda's limp was improving. His leg was still wrapped, but he'd begun testing it, putting weight down, turning carefully, dragging a toy from one end of the enclosure to the other. The team let Eli help refill the water bowl. "I think he likes us," Eli said quietly. "I think he trusts you," I corrected. "Is that different?" I nodded. Liking is easy. Trust takes time. We were nearing a crossroads. Coda couldn't stay at the clinic forever, and though he wasn't ready to return to the wild, he also wasn't acting like a typical domestic animal. We had to decide carefully, respectfully, what the next phase should be. He's not a pet, Dr. Rivera reminded us. He's a life in transition. That line stuck with me. Because aren't we all? We spend so much of life between stages, healing from one thing, preparing for the next. And sometimes the most courageous thing isn't running wild or settling down. It's simply staying present while the wound mends. Coda wasn't done fighting, not yet, but he was no longer fighting alone. At first I thought it was a coincidence, just a kid spending extra time in the corner of a vet room. Eli had always been quiet, good with animals, the kind of boy who crouched beside insects instead of stepping over them. But something changed once Coda came home. The wild cat wasn't just a rescue anymore. He had become a rhythm in our house, a presence that reshaped how we moved, how we spoke, even how we listened. Dr. Rivera allowed us to bring Coda home under a foster agreement. It wasn't forever, and we knew that. But his healing had progressed his legs stable enough for a supervised movement. The clinic had done their part. Now it was up to us to create a space where a wild cat could rest without forgetting who he was. Eli was ready. He had already turned his bedroom closet into a den. He lined it with towels and fleece, cut a small doorway into a cardboard box, and stuck glow-in-the-dark stars to the underside of the top shelf. So it feels like he's outside even when he's not, he explained. He'd even taped a drawing to the wall, Coda smiling awkwardly mid-run wearing a red scarf. The scarf's for style. Eli shrugged. Not all wildcats need to be serious. The first night, Coda didn't enter the closet. He curled beneath the desk and refused food until Eli left the room. But by morning we found him asleep beside the stars. That's when the real bond began. Eli started whispering to Coda each evening. Nothing dramatic, just observation, small stories, sometimes questions. Do you miss the forest? Do you like the way the sun lands on the windowsill in the morning? What does snow feel like on your paws? Coda never responded. Of course, but he never turned away either. One afternoon I walked past the hallway and saw Eli sitting cross-legged, book in lap, reading aloud from a nature guide on wild cats. His voice was low, steady. Coda lay a few feet away, half listening, eyes blinking slowly. It wasn't just the words, it was the consistency, the gentleness, the respect. Kids don't often get credit for that kind of care. But Eli gave it freely. The vet had warned us not to treat Coda like a pet. No cuddling, no play fighting, no forcing affection. Coda needed boundaries to remember he was wild. But what grew between them wasn't pet-like. It was something slower, deeper, a kind of trust that didn't require touch. Coda began mirroring Eli. When Eli woke and moved to the window, Coda followed. When Eli sat by the heater to draw, Coda settled near the warmth. At night, they'd rest on opposite sides of the room, both still, both watching. And sometimes in those quiet hours before bed, I'd find them both staring at the ceiling. I never asked what they saw. One evening, Eli said something that stayed with me. I think he knows how to be wild and gentle at the same time. That one line unraveled a lot for me. Because we're taught that wild means unpredictable. That gentleness requires taming. But what if the two can live in the same body? What if love doesn't erase instinct but works with it? Coda never meowed, but he chirped soft, curious sounds whenever Eli entered the room. He'd flick his tail shuffle toward the corner, rest his paw near Eli's drawing pencils, not touching just near enough to be noticed. In turn, Eli learned patience. He began waking early just to watch the way Coda stretched in morning light. He stopped using music during homework, afraid it might unsettle him. He even rearranged his stuffed animals so Coda wouldn't feel crowded in the room. But perhaps the most telling shift wasn't in the routine, it was in Eli himself. He became more thoughtful. He started writing journal entries, not about what he had done each day, but about what Coda might have felt. Today, Coda saw a bird outside and blinked twice. Coda sniffed the wool blanket. I think he remembers the pine trees. Coda curled up next to the drawing of the moon. Maybe it feels like home. It was a form of empathy I hadn't expected. Eli wasn't projecting. He was interpreting. He was learning to listen without words. And Coda, wounded, wary Coda, was allowing himself to be seen. One chilly morning, Eli placed a shallow dish of water near the window. "In case he gets thirsty while watching the birds," he said. Coda padded over, sniffed it, then walked away. An hour later, when the sky had warmed slightly and the room had filled with light, he returned to drink. There's a kind of unspoken language that forms in those moments. The message, "I see you. I don't need to change you. I'm just here." It reminded me of something Dr. Rivera said weeks earlier. Some of the best bonds aren't built with affection, they're built with presence. Coda's recovery continued. His limp eased. He began walking short distances across the room. His balance improved. And yet, with each step forward, we knew what was coming, the eventual decision. Release or permanent sanctuary. He was wild, but not fully. Gentle, but not tame. Somewhere in the middle, he had carved out a life with us. Not dependent, just shared. That kind of companionship is rare, even among people. Eli never called Coda his. He always said, "We're helping him," and in return, Coda gave him something I couldn't. A sense of purpose, a calm kind of confidence. One afternoon, Eli came home from school with a surprise. His teacher had asked the class to present something they cared about. Most kids chose video games, favorite foods, or books. Eli brought in a hand-drawn poster, Coda the wildcat who stayed a while. He told them about animal rescue, about the difference between wild and domestic, about what it means to care without controlling. He explained why bobcats are important to the ecosystem, how they regulate rodent populations, how they live quietly in the spaces just outside our attention. A few classmates laughed when he said he sleeps in my closet sometimes. But one girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you think he knows you love him?" Eli thought for a long moment, then nodded. "I think he knows. I respect him. And maybe that's more important." That night I asked if he really believed that. "Yes," he said simply, "because loving something wild means letting it be wild, even if it leaves." That was the turning point, not just in the bond, but in the bigger story. Because Coda's time with us wasn't permanent. We knew that. And Eli, more than anyone, had begun preparing for it. Not by withdrawing, but by paying attention. He started researching wildlife centers. He asked Dr. Rivera about rewilding programs. He even began drawing up a plan for a small fundraiser to support bobcat rescue efforts in our area. "In case there are more Codas out there," he said. There was no drama in his voice, no tears, just quiet conviction. Coda, for his part, remained steady, watching, breathing, moving slowly through the house as if it were borrowed, never owned. The bond they built didn't need a leash or a collar or a label. It needed time and space and patience. And when I think about what that taught me, it's this. Sometimes the deepest love is the one that never asks for more than what's offered. The kind that honors instinct, not just emotion. The kind that holds space quietly for healing to happen on its own terms. Because whether it was Eli reading stories by flashlight or Coda blinking in approval from across the room, what they shared was something gentle and sacred. A bond between a boy and a wild cat who never asked to be found but stayed anyway for a little while. And soon that bond would be tested, because not every fight is physical. Some of them begin when the wounds seem healed. There are moments when your house stops feeling like a house. When walls fade and something bigger moves in something older, slower, quieter. That's what happened the week Coda began to explore. He had spent his first few days in Eli's closet den, rising only to eat or stretch, always watching from behind the fleece-draped box like a sentinel in a castle. But slowly, like snow melting along the edge of a roof, he began stepping beyond the threshold. First to the hallway, then the base of the bookshelf, then the center of the living room where the sun made a warm oval on the rug. We didn't call it progress. We just called it Coda, being Coda. Eli built him a soft perimeter blankets layered in quiet corners, an overturned laundry basket, with one side cut out as a lookout cave, even a paper tunnel made from shipping boxes. Bobcats need territory, he explained, holding a hand-drawn floor plan. We don't have a forest, but we can give him zones. At first, I smiled. But then I realized he wasn't playing. He was observing, mapping Coda's routes, timing his rest cycles, replacing food before Coda had to search. He was trying to understand what Coda needed, not what he wanted him to be. And that's when our house changed. It wasn't loud. There were no sudden declarations, no overnight transformations. But gradually the energy of the place shifted. We stopped using harsh lighting at night. We moved more quietly through rooms. We stopped the TV mid-sentence if Coda stirred too sharply. Not out of fear, but out of something softer. Respect. We were learning how to live with a wild animal. Not to tame him, but to make space. And he in return taught us to move differently. He didn't purr often, didn't meow. But he chirped sometimes when the birds gathered outside the window or when Eli entered the room with that off-key hum he always carried. He didn't sleep on laps, but he rested near feet. He didn't demand attention, but he allowed presence. One morning, Eli placed a small towel near the baseboard where the sunlight pooled just after sunrise. Within minutes, Coda had claimed it. That became his sunbed, and no one dared move it, even when guests came. That same week, Eli started a new ritual. He called it Coda's morning hunt. Each day he'd hide one object, a straw wrapper, a crumpled napkin, a sock somewhere in the room, and Coda would find it. Not because he was trained, just because something in him remembered, the way his paws shifted, the stillness before the pounce, the proud drop at Eli's feet when he returned with his catch. He's still wild, Eli would whisper, half smiling. And he was, just in a quieter way. But not everyone understood. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped by unexpectedly. She saw Coda perched on the windowsill, eyes focused, tail twitching slowly, and froze. "That's a bobcat," she whispered, clutching her tote bag. "Yes," I said. "His name's Coda. He's recovering." Her face twisted slightly. "You let that thing live inside." "He's not a thing," Eli said, appearing behind me. She didn't stay long. After the door closed, Eli sat on the floor beside Coda's blanket. He didn't say anything, just reached out, not to touch, but to rest his hand near Coda's paw. "He doesn't scare me," Eli said. "Why does he scare them?" I thought about it, about how we fear what we don't know and judge what we can't name, because they haven't seen how he's changed, I said. Or how you've changed because of him. Coda blinked slow and unbothered. Later that night, I found Eli researching wildlife rehabilitation centers in Arizona. He had a notebook open, pages filled with questions. How do you train a bobcat for rewilding? What happens if they can't go back? Do bobcats miss people? His handwriting was neater than usual. "I just want to do it right," he said. "You already are," I replied, but I knew what he meant. The line between loving a wild animal and loving it right is thin. We wanted to help Coda heal, but not at the cost of forgetting who he was. Wildcat baby. Rescue animal. A creature born into wilderness and survival. Not meant for cuddles or commands, but for forests and freedom. Still, he had chosen to rest near us. And we didn't take that lightly. Dr. Rivera came for a checkup 2 weeks into Coda's home foster. She watched as he walked carefully from one room to another, no longer limping. She took his vitals, checked his healing leg, and scribbled a few notes. "He's stronger," she said. "Quieter, too." I asked what that meant. She shrugged lightly. Some wild animals scream through their pain. Others go still. Coda. He waits, watches. He's cautious but not closed off, and that's rare. Eli handed her a copy of his latest drawing, Coda, sitting in a crown made of leaves surrounded by birds. "He doesn't chase them anymore," he said. He just watches, like he remembers being part of their world. Dr. Rivera smiled. Maybe he does. There's something humbling about realizing how little we control. We built the structure. We made the schedule. We followed the rules. But in the end, Coda healed on his own timeline, chose his own boundaries. We were guests in his process. And in that surrender, something shifted in all of us. We no longer asked, when will he be ready to leave? We began asking, what does he still need before he can? One of those needs we discovered was challenge. Coda had started pacing more, especially in the evenings. He no longer napped in the same spots. He searched corners, watched doorways. He wasn't restless, but something in him was stirring, like a clock winding forward. Eli noticed first. He needs more. So we built him a new structure. It wasn't a forest, but it was close. Bookshelves turned into platforms. A felt-covered ramp connected to the top of the window seat. Eli crafted a cardboard tree with tiny holes to stash treats. He called it Coda's Wild Room. And every day, Coda explored it. He leapt gently, eyes wide, tail sharp. He sniffed every crevice, scratched at textures, climbed, rested, then climbed again. He's preparing, Eli whispered, for whatever comes next. That's when I knew. Nature had entered our living room not to be domesticated, but to remind us what freedom looks like even in small spaces, even in moments of stillness. Coda didn't belong to us, but he had allowed us to witness something rare, a wild spirit choosing rest without surrendering identity, choosing connection without compromise. That's the lesson I keep turning over. You can help heal something wild without making it yours. You can love without caging, support without taming. And sometimes when you do that, when you hold space instead of control, the wild comes closer, stays longer, leaves something behind. Coda had brought us that lesson, quietly, fully. And soon that lesson would be tested. Because healing is one thing, holding on is another. And letting go. That takes the wildest kind of courage. The first sign was so small we missed it. Coda skipped his morning hunt. Eli had hidden a straw wrapper behind the shoe rack like always, and usually Coda would wait until the room fell quiet, then prowl forward with soft, practiced steps. He never failed to find it. But that morning the wrapper stayed where it was. Coda remained curled in the corner, paws tucked under eyes, half closed, unmoving. Eli didn't say anything right away. He just sat near him, tracing the fringe of the rug with his finger, waiting. Maybe he's tired, I offered. Maybe Eli said. But the worry had already crept into his voice. Over the next 2 days, Coda's energy dipped. His appetite changed. He still walked the length of the living room each afternoon, still climbed the cardboard ramp, but his movements were slower. He blinked more often. He lay longer in the sun. Healing, we had assumed, was a straight path forward, from injury to recovery, weakness to strength. But Coda was reminding us that wildness doesn't follow human expectations, and neither does healing. We brought him to Dr. Rivera. She examined him gently, speaking softly as she moved. His weight's stable, she said, but his temperature's slightly lower than normal. She took blood, checked his heart. When she touched his abdomen, Coda let out a low, soft growl, more exhaustion than anger. That's new, she said. We'll run a full panel. Eli stood close but quiet. He didn't ask the questions this time. He just watched. He knew. That night the house felt still in a different way. Not peaceful, not expectant, just held breath. Coda rested on the window pillow, his head turned toward the trees. The birds outside were quieter too, as if they'd noticed something. The next morning, Dr. Rivera called with results. Some inflammation markers are back, she said. Mild, but present. Could be immune-related. Could be a delayed response to the trauma. I asked if it was dangerous. She hesitated, then said, Not immediately, but we should keep him calm, monitor closely, start a low-dose anti-inflammatory. Let's not rush assumptions. I nodded, phone to my ear, Eli listening in from the hallway. That evening, Eli built another den, smaller this time, lined with his softest hoodie and a flashlight taped above as a skylight. He posted a sign above it, Coda's quiet place. When I passed by later, I saw him laying next to it, reading out loud from his journal. Coda didn't move, but his tail twitched once. That was enough. Healing, we were learning, doesn't always mean progress. Sometimes it means circling back. Sometimes it means stillness. And when you're caring for a wild animal, you don't get guarantees. You get glimpses. Moments. That weekend, Coda stood only twice. Both times, Eli helped guide him with soft words and slow movement. There was no panic in Coda, just quiet retreat, like a tide pulling away. I think he's listening to something we can't hear, Eli whispered. We made another appointment. Dr. Rivera came to the house this time. Coda allowed her presence. No hiss, no growl, just the blink, the breath, the subtle pull of his body as she touched his flank. Still no fever, she said. No distress, but not improving, I asked. She looked down. No, not yet. That night, Eli wrote something he didn't let me read. He folded the page, tucked it beneath the edge of Coda's blanket, and pressed his hand to it for a long time. I'm telling him, it's okay, he said softly. That we'll be okay, even if he needs to go. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were sad, but because they were true. We want so badly for recovery to be a ladder upward measured, predictable. But sometimes, especially in the world of wild animal rescue, it's a spiral. Sometimes they rise, then pause. Sometimes they float. Sometimes they begin to go. And sometimes they come back just for a moment. 2 days later, Coda surprised us. It was late afternoon. The room was quiet. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. I was folding towels, and Coda, who had barely stood in a week, rose. He didn't leap or pounce. He walked, slow, unsteady. Careful. He crossed the rug, turned toward Eli, and curled up against his foot. Eli stirred, blinked, and smiled without speaking. He just reached down, resting his fingers against the top of Coda's head. The contact was light, reverent. That night, Eli added a line to his journal, Coda walked to me today. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Sometimes the smallest gestures hold the loudest meanings. We started the medication Dr. Rivera recommended. We shifted our rhythms again, shorter play windows, quieter mornings, softer transitions. Coda responded. Not dramatically, but steadily. He began to eat again, small portions. He lifted his head when Eli entered the room. He stretched more often, even pawed gently at the edges of his fleece towel. We didn't call it recovery. We called it presence. And in those quiet weeks, something changed in all of us. Eli stopped waiting for Coda to get better. He started celebrating what Coda was right now. Whether sleeping or still twitching or alert every moment was enough. Every breath was a kind of trust. And I learned something too. I had always thought rescue meant returning something to what it used to be. But maybe rescue is about helping something become what it can be here now with no promises. Healing is not a line, not a race, not a goal. It's a relationship. And Coda was teaching us how to hold that. Eventually, Dr. Rivera offered a cautious hope. He's stabilizing, she said. No new symptoms, some strength returning. Still not perfect, but not declining. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Eli nodded. He's doing what wild animals do. He's adapting. That night we placed a new blanket near the heater vent. Coda stepped onto it without hesitation. He curled tight, eyes half closed. Eli sat nearby, reading quietly. I watched them both, wrapped in their own kind of silence. We didn't know how long this would last, but we knew how much it mattered. Because saying goodbye in the world of wildlife rescue doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes it just means letting go of the plan, letting the animal lead, letting their body and instinct shape the path. And even when they stay, even when they recover, They never come back the same. Neither do we. Coda was different now, and so were we. Soon we'd find out what that meant, not just for us, but for what would come next. Because in one small room, one small home, something bigger was starting to take shape. A community, a mission, and all of it because of one quiet wool cat. We didn't expect anything to change after Coda's health stabilized. Not really. Our goal had been simple: help him heal, protect his wildness, and let him go when the time came. But healing, it turned out, wasn't the final chapter. It was just the door. Because once Coda stopped needing us so fully, Eli began to wonder who else needed him. It started with a question over breakfast. Eli was spreading peanut butter on toast. Coda curled up in his usual sun patch by the bookshelf. "Mom," he said, not looking up. "What if Coda's not the only one I glanced over?" "What do you mean?" "Like, what if there's another bobcat out there, or a fox, or even a kitten? What if someone else needs a soft place to rest?" It was such a simple thought, but it held weight. The next day, Eli emailed Dr. Rivera from my laptop. He asked if the shelter ever needed help with temporary fostering. He explained our setup: quiet, calm, structured. He even included a picture of Coda napping beside a cardboard ramp with the caption, "Wild, but recovering." She responded quickly. "We're always looking for families with experience and patience," she wrote. "And your home clearly has both." A week later, we welcomed our first official foster, a kitten named Clover, found behind a hardware store after a storm, soaked and shivering with a twisted jaw and cautious eyes. Eli built a small enclosure in the spare room, just a laundry basket with cut-out windows and layers of fleece. He placed one of Coda's blankets near the edge, letting the scent speak first. Clover didn't hide. She crept forward slowly and rested near the cloth like it meant something. Coda watched from a distance. He didn't approach, didn't interfere. But every time Clover moved, Coda's ears shifted. Every time she cried out, he blinked. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, our home turned into something we hadn't planned: a sanctuary. Not just for animals, but for Eli, for growth, for quiet purpose. He created a wall chart titled Coda's Circle. Each foster earned a place photo, name, date of arrival, date of departure, sentence about what made them special. Under Clover's name, he wrote, "Learned to trust the towel first." By spring, we'd fostered 3 more. There was Minnow, nervous, wiry, hissed at her shadow, but slept on Eli's hoodie. There was Pebble, tiny, half-blind, followed voices like a compass. And there was Tata, a chunky orange tabby who refused to play unless the radio was on. For each of them, Coda remained steady. He never tried to lead, he never hovered, but he was there, always in the corner, always watching. "They learn from him," Eli whispered once. "They see he's not scared, so they try not to be." We began to notice patterns. The fosters would cry less at night if Coda was in the room. They'd explore more boldly when he rested near the threshold. They'd nap closer together when his tail flicked as if signaling permission. Rivera started referring other cases to us, those that needed gentler surroundings, slower rhythms. "It's rare," she said, "but some animals calm others. Coda's like a wild torchbearer." The phrase stuck, because that's what he had become. A quiet flame passing on warmth without asking for anything in return. And Eli, well, Eli had caught the spark. He began writing articles for the local shelter newsletter. Little blurbs about fostering, tips for setting up peaceful spaces, why blankets matter more than toys in the first week. His words weren't technical, they were honest, and they reached people. One family down the street signed up to foster after reading about Pebble. Another neighbor dropped off 2 bags of kitten food with a note in honor of the bobcat with the steady eyes. Word spread, slowly, quietly, just like Coda. Then Eli had an idea. "We should host an adoption day," he said one morning mid-cereal. "Here, In the living room. I laughed at first, but he wasn't joking. Just a small one, he added. We can invite neighbors, print posters, set up a table with lemonade and pictures. Maybe someone will meet their cat. And so we did. 2 weekends later, our living room transformed. The bookshelf held name cards. The windowsill became a photo wall. A small cardboard sign read, "Coda's friends need you." Guests came in waves, neighbors, classmates, even Mara from the shelter. Some stayed 5 minutes. Others lingered asking Eli about every kitten, every routine. He told them how Tata loved classical music, how Minnow curled up if you hummed softly, how Clover had purred for the first time beside a pine-scented blanket. And through it all, Uda sat by the window, dignified and still, not hiding, not performing, just present, as always. By the end of the day, one kitten had an adoption meeting scheduled. Another had 2 interested families. And Eli. He stood at the window that evening, hands behind his back, and whispered to Coda, "You did it." That night he added a new section to his journal, a sketch of cats seated in a circle, all facing the same center, Coda. Above them in block letters he wrote, "Because of one." There's a lesson here. One I keep returning to. We think impact requires scale, volume, reach, but sometimes it begins with one quiet moment. One wild creature. One child who chooses not just to care, but to keep caring. Coda never asked to become a symbol. He never roared, never demanded attention, but in his silence he reminded us of what connection looks like without conditions. And in the process he sparked something none of us expected: movement. Momentum. Community. People still ask us if Coda will ever be released back into the wild. It's not an easy answer. His leg is strong, but not perfect. His instincts remain, but his context has shifted. He lives in balance, part Bobcat, part witness to the human world. Dr. Rivera once said, "Not every wild animal returns to the forest. Some stay at the edge, teaching others how to cross safely. Coda is one of those." And now we were starting to see just how far his influence could reach. What he sparked in Eli. Curiosity, responsibility, compassion wasn't temporary. It was a path, one we were walking together, foster by foster, breath by breath. Because the wild doesn't disappear. It transforms. And sometimes it passes through one small life into many others. And eventually, it finds a way to stay. Some stories don't end. They just move forward, quietly changing shape as they pass through the lives they've touched. That's what happened with Coda. He stayed. Not because he was tamed, not because he couldn't survive in the wild, but because something in him, something old, instinctive, knew he had work to finish. And we had more to learn. Eli's wall, once just a cluster of drawings, had become something else. A map of lives. Every kitten, every foster, every little wild thing that passed through our home left a photo, a memory, a note. Beneath each one, Eli wrote a single sentence. For Minnow. She taught me that fear can look like bravery. For Pebble, he followed the sound even when he couldn't see. For Clover, she trusted the towel before she trusted me. At the center of the wall, Coda's photo sat alone. No sentence beneath it, just a hand-drawn flame. He's not just a foster, Eli said one day. He's the one who lit the others. That line stayed with me. Because what Coda gave us wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, patient, a steady warmth that asked nothing yet offered everything. And that warmth spread. Our home, once quiet, now hummed with purpose. Each new foster brought a new rhythm. Feedings, vet visits, soft steps in the night. Each goodbye was bittersweet. But with every departure, we saw the same thing healing made visible. Not just in the animals, but in us. And still Coda stayed. He watched the fosters come and go, his eyes always alert, never interfering. He wasn't their caretaker, not exactly, but his presence mattered. They responded to him. So did we. Even neighbors who once raised eyebrows began to understand. One by one, they came to our small adoption days. They brought treats, towels, donated toys. They'd kneel quietly near Coda's window perch and say things like, "So this is the one who started it all," and Eli would nod proud but gentle. Yeah, that's Coda. We never tried to label what Coda had become. Was he still wild? Was he family? Was he something in between? He was simply Coda, and in many ways his story reminded us that not everything needs to be defined to be meaningful. One afternoon, Eli received a letter in the mail from a local wildlife rescue volunteer named Lisa. She had seen one of his newsletter pieces. Inspired by Coda's story, she'd signed up to become a foster herself. In her letter, she wrote, "I didn't think I had anything left to offer. But then I saw how one boy and one bobcat could shift the energy of a whole town. I figured maybe I could be a part of that too." That letter now sits framed beside Eli's desk. That's what legacy looks like. It doesn't need to be grand. It just needs to ripple. And Coda's ripples stretched further than we ever expected. In the spring, a teacher from Eli's school invited him to share his fostering journey with the class. He brought in photos, simple diagrams about how to set up a foster space, and a short video clip of Coda blinking slowly in the sun. At the end, a girl raised her hand. "Do you think animals love us back?" Eli paused for a long moment before answering. "I think they love differently. Not with words, not always with touch, but with trust, with showing up, with staying close even when they could leave." That evening, he added a new page to his journal. "Coda taught me that silence can be love too. We never expected to keep him forever. And in a way, we still haven't. Coda moves through our lives like the seasons, sometimes visible, sometimes tucked away, always present in some quiet corner. He doesn't sleep on beds. He doesn't purr for no reason. He prefers shadows to spotlights, but he is here. And his presence continues to guide us. And maybe that's the bigger idea, what rescue really means. Not just pulling something from danger, but walking with it as it finds a new way to live. Coda taught us that every creature, no matter how wild, carries something sacred. That healing isn't about returning to what was, but discovering what could be. That even the quietest animal, the one curled in the corner of a backpack, can become a mentor, a symbol, a torchbearer. So often people search for meaning in the big things, in events, headlines, achievements. But sometimes the deepest meaning shows up in the small choices, like noticing a sound in your hallway, unzipping a backpack, choosing to stay. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one animal, one boy who decides that loving something wild is worth the wait. Coda reminded us that kindness doesn't have to be loud. That real rescue happens in the in-between spaces. That gentleness is power. That presence is enough. And now, maybe it's your turn, because stories like this one don't end here. They continue when someone else decides to notice, to act, to care. So here's what I'll ask of you. Pause for a moment. Think about the Codas in your life, the animals, the people, the moments that shaped you quietly. That taught you trust, that asked nothing and gave everything. Maybe there's a shelter near you. Maybe there's a neighbor with a story. Maybe there's a wild spirit waiting for someone to sit close, listen softly, and believe in their healing. You don't have to be an expert. You don't need a forest or fancy supplies. All you need is space, time, respect, and love that expects nothing in return. That's how it starts. And if Coda's story moved you even just a little, if it made you breathe slower, listen deeper, or feel something unexpected, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, like the video, share it with someone who needs to believe in quiet hope again. Because maybe, just maybe, you are the next one to carry the torch forward for every baby bobcat, every rescue animal, every wild-hearted creature seen and unseen. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.